Hello and welcome to another episode of Foundation with Steve Teed. I am your host and servant Steve Teed, here to ask you that very important question. What do you build your life on? What is the foundation for your life? We're asking the question of how do you answer those big questions in life? What is right? What is wrong? Where is purpose? Where is value? And ultimately it comes down to the truth of what's going to happen when this life is over. Because that's a question we have to ask. And here we teach that the best foundation is the foundation of Jesus Christ and His Word. So let's cut the music and I'll tell you where we're going to go on this episode. First, let me apologize. There was no episode last week dealing with health issues, not me. Children, it's the beauty of being a father. I had a child with strep throat, which took up a lot of time and lost some sleep. So there was no episode last week. So if you we're looking for an episode that came out at that date, you didn't miss it. It just wasn't there. Good to know that my child is very well recovering. Antibiotics worked well. But to that, coming into our stories this week, where are we going this week? Today we're going to do 3 news stories, not long ones, but one's kind of a public service announcement for us. Because the danger that I have seen that has risen up, and I've seen people jump on the bandwagon, and it's one I don't want us to fall into. But before we get there, the first story that we're going to look at, I've got to do the obligatory Roe Vs Wade. For those who aren't familiar with, Roe Vs Wade was overturned by the United States Supreme Court just last week, and with that has come some fascinating things. We're going to talk about that. I'm not going to talk about it in full depth. I'm not going to go into fully what Roe v. Wade is. I had a conversation with my wife the other night as she asked what that was and why was that important. And truthfully, I'm not even American. I'm Canadian, for those who don't know, but I'm in Canada. But even then, our own Prime Minister here said it was a horrible thing that it was overturned. It's how dare this go that way, that kind of thing. And I'm not a fan of our Prime Minister nonetheless, just the way it is. And then you see how it just kind of snowballs from there. So we're going to talk a little bit about Roe v. Wade and the overturning and what that kind of means a little bit. And we're going to look at an article on that. And as I said, we're going to do a small article there about a warning to us. And then we're going to jump over to Relevant Magazine. Now, normally I cover those in the second half of the show where I do a little more teaching aspect. But this one, I'm going to call it a news article as it is with the news article. And the reason being it's because of something that it's reporting. So it's actually doing a report, not just a commentary kind of thing where they're trying to push an agenda, although they always try to push an agenda. So that's where we're going to go on today a little bit for the first half of our episode here. So we're going to be going into the news articles, and for that, I got to put up the music. Here we go. All right, so our first news article, before I get into the actual picture on screen, Roe v. Wade has been overturned by the United States Supreme Court. Now, why is that important? Roe v. Wade basically made absolute protection on the abortion issue, making it we'll call it a federal right kind of thing. And Roe v. Wade has been overturned. And now what does that actually mean? What that actually means is the federal government of the United States now has no ruling over it. And so therefore, it's now up to those individual states. It's up to those individual states. And so with that, now people may be going, well, why is that significant? Well, this is a funny thing about here in Canada when it comes to something like that. Now, we don't have a Roe v. Wade, obviously, and truthfully, we don't even have an abortion law. Now, we do have something that's kind of similar to Roe v. Wade. I said we don't have one, but I said we do. Okay, what do I mean by that? I think it's under Morgentaler, I think is what it was. Morgentaler. And what he actually got done through court cases was not make abortion constitutionally legal in Canada, or making it a constitutional right, despite what Prime Minister Justin Trudeau likes to teach and proclaim. What it actually did was just strike down abortion laws. So in other words, when it comes to abortion in Canada is really just there. And what I mean by that is the fact that there is no law on abortion in Canada, therefore it's left up to the individual provinces. to make up their minds. And that's essentially what has happened in the States. With Roe v. Wade being taken down, it's no longer a federal law or federal declaration. It's now up to the individual states. And some of those individual states, like, immediately put in abortion bans, which would now be their right to do so. And I'm going to say I applaud that. Obviously, I hold to the value of life. I hold that all life is created in the image of God, and therefore, whether in the womb, out of the womb, it is valuable in that aspect. But obviously, they're taking it a little bit further, and you see shock headlines where people are saying that, oh, the next thing will be homosexual marriage. The next thing, things like this, transgender laws, and whatever. And they're trying to make this big equation of it all, and that's really what they're trying to say. And when you get it, and some of the response to the Roe v. Wade has been really up there. It's been really out there, and I saw a Twitter here, and I'm not going to put this one on because I'd have to blur a lot of it. But one of the ladies that held a poster on it was basically just saying F babies, except she didn't say F, obviously. I'm not one who's about to curse. I don't curse in my daily life. I'm not going to do it on a show or anything. And this whole thing, then you get this normal debates, like keep your hands off my body, things like that. Now, I'm not going to say that in the next couple of weeks or so aren't going to be interesting, because I'm fully expecting probably protests and things like that happening in the States over this. But again, it's something that we need to talk about. Now, what do I really want to talk about? Because there's plenty of people who are going to talk about that. You can find them on there. People who are probably far more educated in politics than I am. It's no secret that my area of studies and expertise is in theology and more in the philosophy and that kind of thing. Not so much politics. I delve in there a little bit, only when looking at the top question. But there is this article that I want to look at, and it's here again this one's from the Daily Wire, and I use them a lot just because they cover things. And this is a response to it. It says, here are the woke businesses vowing to cover travel costs for employees' abortion tourism. Now, what is that talking about? I want to mention this a little bit. Again, remember I said that what it's done, it's removed the federal aspect of abortion and left it up to the states. And some states, as I said, are already striking down abortion, saying we're not going to make it legal in our state. Well, what about businesses who work in those states? Well, they're saying that we're going to pay for you, our employees, if they need an abortion. Let me correct that. Not if they need. If they so desire to kill the child that they have growing within them because of their irresponsible actions of partaking in an action that is designed to reproduce life, then they will pay for them and reimburse some of their travel to go to another state to kill the baby. That's what it is. But let's look at the article a little bit. After the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade Friday, several businesses announced that they would fund employees' decision to seek abortions in other states. The 1973 opinion, which argued that the 14th Amendment of the Constitution protects abortion, was overturned throughout the court ruling in Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization. After Justice Samuel Alito's draft opinion leaked in early May, businesses started announcing that they would pay travel expenses for employees trying to obtain abortions. On Friday, several more companies followed suit. Our company remains committed to removing barriers and providing comprehensive access to quality and affordable care for all of our employees, cast members, and their families, including family planning and reproductive care, no matter where they are. Executives from the entertainment conglomerate Disney said in a memo obtained by CNBC. What is Disney doing? Is Disney just going to continue to shoot itself in the foot? They've gone downhill. Their movies have gotten worse. Their shows are getting worse. And I don't just mean that because they're having LGBTQ characters. I mean the quality is going downhill. The quality of story writing has gone downhill. Is what has happened. They can't even tell a story anymore. And truthfully, this is the same problem that happens when you try to put any kind of message ahead of the actual story. That's really what the problem is. And I find this also, and I watch Christian movies, but I found this pretty bad in Christian movies too, where they focus more on the message, even if it's an important message. the story suffers because of it. And Disney just continues to do this. They really do. Disney employs 75,000 people in Florida, where Governor Ron DeSantis, Republican Florida, recently signed legislation banning abortions after 15-week gestation. And I wish it was actually earlier than that. I wish he'd go the whole way and ban it. And they say, we have process in place so that an employee who may be unable to access care in one location has affordable coverage for receiving similar levels of care in another location, the executives continued. This travel benefit covers medical situations related to cancer treatments, transplants, rare disease treatments, and family planning, including pregnancy-related discussions. Now, if that's all they did and that's all they really went for, and a company did that saying, hey, you can't get the best travel here and you can go to another state, we're going to help cover that for things like cancer treatments, transplants, rare diseases, and if the family planning was dealing with infertility issues and things like that, I'd be all for that. And I hate the fact that they call it, and I don't use that word often, but I actually do hate it, that they call killing a baby a pregnancy-related issue or reproductive decision. No, the reproductive decision was made when you decided to lay down and engage in an activity that God designed to reproduce. That's what the problem is. So Disney's doing this. Dick's Sporting Goods CEO Lauren Hobart said on a Friday that the company is prepared to ensure that all of our teammates have consistent and safe access to the benefits we provide, regardless of the state in which they live. So again, they're going to go for it as well. Again, they'll pay up to $4,000, and they're going for that as well. Investment bank Goldman Sachs said in a memo obtained by Business Insiders that it would extend healthcare travel reimbursement policies to include all medical procedures, treatments, and evaluations, including abortion services and gender-affirming care, where a provider is not available in proximity to where people live. In June 1st, memo published on Friday by CNBC, investment bank JP Morgan Chase, which already covered abortions, revealed it will also pay for employees to obtain them out of state. So you start to see how they're going here. Clothing manufacturer Levi Strauss said in early May that business leaders need to make their voices heard and act to protect the health and well-being of our employees. The health and well-being. I didn't realize that pregnancy is so bad that it's going to destroy them. Now, I'm not saying there's not going to be changes to a female's body, but it does happen. But you see, it's almost like being pregnant now is a disease, is what has to be done. And so again, Levi Strauss said that they're going to that it would oppose any steps to restrict access to full range of reproductive health care, including abortion. Abortion is not reproductive health care, but that's what they want. Again, a report released in May by electric car maker Tesla showed that the company added travel and lodging support to those who may need to seek health care services that are unavailable in their home state to its safety net and health insurance offering last year. Tesla recently moved its headquarters to Texas, and Attorney General Ken Paxton announced on Friday that abortion is now illegal in the Lone Star states. So Texas is one of those states that as soon as it came down said illegal, gone. Likewise, e-commerce giant Amazon said that it would provide as much as $4,000. So what you're seeing here is companies saying, okay, we're going to pay for this. Now, why do we want to talk about that? Why is it such a surprise here? Why does that make headlines? Well, the reason being is because I think what you're entirely seeing, and you're going to see this, and I believe you will probably see it in the States, and that always spills over into Canada, and you're going to see probably a different backlash in Canada. But I think in the States, you're going to see a continuing tearing down of the moral fabric of the United States. You're going to see a continuing divide. An enemy that's divided is easier to conquer. And that's the way it is. And you see this divide. Now, what I also see here is what you see play out is Romans chapter 1. Romans chapter 1. And what is Romans 1? Romans 1 talks about the fact that God is going to hand them over to a debased heart. As they continue to reject God, and how it starts out in Romans chapter 1 there, starting in verse 18 as it continues on. Although they knew God, they did not like to retain the knowledge of God. In other words, they willfully forgot who God is. They willfully push him out of their minds, and that includes in issues of morality. And as that happens, you see this continual degradation of the human condition, willfully more and more into sin. As God hands them over, he turns them over to their own heart. And then you see this, so they start doing things that they shouldn't be doing. They start worshiping the creation rather than the creator. And that's what we see happen when people are all about Mother Earth. They're all about kind of the animal kingdom and rising them up to almost deification status. And then God continues to hand them over, and then sexual immorality becomes the standard, where now women exchange the natural relations with men for the unnatural of women, and men likewise reject women for other men. And as this continues on, this depravity, it says God hands them over, and at the end, it says not only do they do these things, they celebrate those who do them. And here you see the encouragement of this. And how do they do it? Well, look at the language. As I've already pointed out, they talk this about a reproductive right. Well, how's that a reproductive right when you kill one in the convenience of the others? You got a problem here. And make no mistake, as much as they try to argue about rape and incest and things like that, it really comes down to convenience. It really does. It's convenient for them that I don't want to change my life, that I don't want the consequence of my action, despite the fact that you've got a few people who put out forward who try to, this idea of like they celebrate having an abortion, but they never talk about the full consequences. They never talk about the actual procedure. They never talk about that the fetus is actually fully developed pretty much by that point. They never talk about the long-term consequences, not just the psychological, but the physical ones. That after an abortion, it actually becomes it can become more difficult for a female to have to be able to procreate again, because it does damage to the uterus and the uterus lining and things like that. But they're celebrating it. And what you're seeing in this headline that I brought forth about these businesses are doing this, these are people who are celebrating the wickedness. And it shows just the debased heart. And in the end, what does it honestly show? It honestly shows that the judgment of God is going to fall. That's what it comes down to. As the wickedness of humanity continues to grow and it's on display and things like this, it shows how close the cup of God's wrath is going to be poured out. Now, again, I celebrate the overturning of Roe v. Wade, and I celebrate those states that are making abortion illegal. But I'm going to say, Sarah, I don't think it's enough just to make abortion illegal. You need to do things to make adoption more readily available. Stop making adoption cost thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. Encourage adoption in this rate. Encourage it, making it easier access. I think they've gone one step, and they've got the one step of making abortion not accessible, but make the alternative even more and more accessible. That's what you have to do. And I think that's where we really have to step up. All right. Enough of that story. This one, again, this one's not really a news story, but I want to cover it anyway. And there we are. This one is a story. It's a tweet that went on Twitter, obviously, because it's a tweeter. And I saw it on one show that I like to watch on YouTube. Usually I haven't watched it lately, but you put it on there, and I was like, is that real? Is that real? Because I wanted to know, was that real? And here's the actual story. So, tweet. CNN, Kelloggs spokesperson announces Rice Krispie mascot Pop is now a trans woman. And then it shows a picture of Snap, Crackle, and Pop. You got Snap there on the left, Crackle in the middle, and Pop on the right. And it has Pop now with long purple hair, more feminine features, and something like that. And then it says this article is by Helen Reagan and Andrew Rain, CNN. And it says updated 2:35 a.m. Eastern Time, May 20th, 2022. Now, I saw that story, and I was like, huh, really? And this has been retweeted 2,520 times at the taking of that picture, of that screenshot. It's been quoted 798 times with 55,000, we'll call it 56,000 likes. And I thought about that. I was like, wow, wait a minute. And I think if we're definitely on the conservative side, and we're definitely on the the side of biblical standards, we may be going, oh great, look, they're doing it again, they're pushing their agenda and that kind of thing. And I look at that and I'm just kind of, I don't know. Is that true? Is that real? And the more I looked into it, I didn't think it was real. And you say, well, what do you mean? Well, first of all, the cereal's not called Rice Krispie. It's Rice Krispies. It's plural. It's Rice Krispies. And now, is it possible for a news organization to make typos? Well, yeah. Generally not in the headlines, but I have seen them throughout articles. I'm not one to speak. I make plenty of typos on things, and people can see that. I put in wrong titles on a video before. But this one, the more I researched it, I can't find an original article. I can't find anything where that is. Now, Helen Reagan and Andrew Rain, they actually do exist. They're real people that out of the Hong Kong area of CNN, I think it was. They're real people. They really work for CNN. But I can't find the story. Now, it's nothing for CNN to bury a story. It's nothing for a news organization to write a story, to get backlash and bury it. But you can't find it. And if CNN really did this, I would expect a place like Daily Wire to pick it up, or maybe even Fox News to pick it up. Somewhere else to pick it up. Not just this random tweet that went viral. Now, by viral, I just mean 25,000. And like I said, I saw it on a YouTube show that I like. But everything I look at, and I don't normally look at fact checkers, but I wanted to see their argument, because fact checkers, if you want to know if a story's controversial and true, yet true on a fact checker, just look for the missing context label. That's typically where it comes up. That means the story's true, but we don't want to admit it's true. But this one, it's fake. It's not a true story. And I think what we have to do is we have to be aware of these things and not just immediately go to our gut, not immediately rely on emotion and say, hey, look at this. They're doing it again. They're false. They're pushing the agenda. Look, plenty of places are pushing the agenda. Didn't I just showed Disney pushing the agenda. Disney's been pushing it for a while. Dick's Sporting Good pushing an agenda. Those things are pushing an agenda. And if Kellogg's is going to push an agenda, I don't think they're going to hide. I think they put it right out there. But Kellogg's has responded and said, we have no plan to do this. No, it's not the first. And when Kellogg's does things, yeah, they'll be blatant about it. This isn't true. And I don't want us to get caught up in it. I don't want us to think, hey, yeah, there we go. No, it's not true. And so I just want this to serve as a warning, not to just go with the gut reaction. And I've seen this happen in so many things, where people say, I want this to be true. It's not true. It's false. It's fake. And we have to be aware of fake news, especially when we're trying to proclaim the truth. If we're trying to proclaim the truth, do not fall into this trap. Because the second we start putting these things out there, the second we start putting things out that aren't true, automatically people are going to say, well, they're discredited. They can't even tell the truth. They don't understand. They're gullible. And this is where we got to make sure we don't fall into. And so that's what I just wanted to put that out there, that this is fake. Because if it were real, I could have put in, and I typed in the whole thing, Kellogg's spokesperson announces Rice Krispie mascot Pop is now a trans woman, and I put CNN, and nothing comes up at all. Nothing. No other organization's covering it. It was a tweet. It was a fake thing that somebody made to make it look like CNN. And CNN, there's enough on CNN itself that you can find. It's fake. Don't fall for it. Trust me, there's plenty of other places. Stick to the textbooks where they try to push it in. It's found on TVs. It's found in various things. Anytime they want to talk about representation, yeah, that's where it's found. This is fake. Don't fall for it. Don't fall for it. All right, one more story. I said I wanted to cover 3 today. All right, our third story that I want to do. Now, this one is coming from Relevant Christianity. Relevant Christianity. Now, obviously, I don't go to Relevant Christianity for anything really good. I look to see how bad they are. I used to do that quite a bit, particularly there was a show on our Christian radio station here. I think it was called The River. And I used to joke, because I'd pick up a person for Bible study, and I would want to see and count how many times something would be heretical between me leaving my house to picking this person up. And it was only a drive of like 6 kilometers. For those, it's like 2.5 miles. For those who are miles, they want to know the distance there. And I would joke about it. And other ones, I used to drive, just go into my office, 3 kilometers, I'd joke about it. And how many things are heretical? And that's kind of what I go to Relevant Christianity for. What are they heretically teaching? But every once in a while, they put something in. And here's what they put in. A study. A growing number of pastors are willing to let LGBTQ people serve in church. To serve in church. Now, I have a problem with this, but let me go to the article first. Let's go there first. A new study from Lifeway Research has found that while there remains a lot of disagreement and confusion around LGBTQ Christians in the American church, more Protestant pastors are open to having them serve in their churches than they were just 5 years ago. Yeah, I can probably see why. Just because of how many I've gotten off track, but okay. 2016, about 34% of all Protestant pastors said they were not willing to let LGBTQ people serve in the church in any capacity. Now that number has dropped to about 31%. 28% of all Protestant pastors say LGBTQ people can serve in their churches in any capacity, while 22% say they can serve in at least one area, but not every area. Protestant pastors are most likely to say LGBTQ people can serve in helping and service roles, with 44% saying that was not allowed. Only 24% say LGBTQ people can serve in public worship, 24% say they can serve in public teaching, and 25% welcome them in public leadership. All right, now this is going to be probably more controversial, and I'm going to go on a limb here and say I'm going to fall in that 44%. 28%. Which one here? I'm sorry, I'm going through this here. 30% they were not willing to. There we go. 34%. I'm going to be in the 34%, that first 34%. And no. Now, I'm going to be even worse than that. I'm not going to limit that just to LGBTQ. I'm going to limit that to anybody who is continually and willfully living a lifestyle that is contrary to the teachings of the scriptures. That would be anybody who's living in a constantly adulterous relationship. That is anybody who's engaging in fornication. That is anybody who is constantly engaged in theft. That is anybody who constantly engaged in a lifestyle that is contrary to the Word of God. That is in all positions. Yes, absolutely. You say, well, how about somebody who's continually engaged in theft? Will I allow them to be the janitor? Well, no, because they would have a key to the building. They could get in and take anything out. I'm not going to put that out there. He said, what about gluttonous behavior? Okay, he said, we kind of marked that one down. No, the same is true in that aspect. Now, make no mistake, does that mean they can't attend? No, I encourage everybody to attend. Everybody to attend. No matter where we are in life, everybody to attend the service. Now, is everybody going to be comfortable? Well, maybe not. Especially if you're teaching the true Word of God. If you teach exactly what the Word says, not your opinion, but what the Word says, not everybody's going to be comfortable. But they're opening it up to anybody who comes in. And look, even to the point that said 25% in public leadership, putting in worship, leading in public worship. Absolutely not. Not. Let's continue. Overall, more pastors indicate LGBTQ plus persons may serve somewhere in their churches today compared to 2016, said Scott McConnell, Executive Director of Lifeway Research. Mainline Protestant pastors are more likely to say LGBTQ people can serve in their churches than evangelical pastors are. Now, why is that significant? Because evangelical has become a subset in Protestantism. See, it used to be that it was Catholic and Protestant, the two groups. And the Protestants were united, although they may disagree on certain doctrines, faith alone, through grace alone, and Scripture alone, and Christ is the head of the church, things like that. Christ alone, through grace alone, through Christ alone, and the Scriptures alone. Now, what does that mean? Well, it was against certain aspects of faith plus works, which are very found in the Catholic Church, saying you've got to do certain aspects like these penance, you got to do these aspects of grace, these sacraments. There's the word I wanted. These sacraments for the issue of salvation, and the Church's tradition, in their opinion, is equal to the Scriptures. Now, tradition has a part to play, but in the Catholic Church, often what happens is the Scriptures become subservient to tradition. And so the Protestants separated themselves from that, and that's really what kind of united them. But over time, it's fallen into two camps. Particularly, there's actually a lot more than that, where Protestants are a little more divided now. Now, you see here, Protestant churches and evangelicals. Now, evangelicals are Protestants, but they now become a subset, where Protestants encompass any church organization that is not falling under the school of Catholicism. That would include Mennonites. That would include Wesleyans. That would be Baptists. That would be Pentecostals. That would be Methodists. So any groups like that. Now, they're going to vary greatly now, because as churches have gone off the track, they're not going to fall under. So that's so when it says 52% of mainline Protestants, well, you're going to have places like the Methodist Church, which is very much off the rails with its LGBTQ support. You're going to have Anglicans, which have a good section of them have fallen off into that. In Canada, we have the United Church, which is very much off into that, very much like the States' United Methodist Church. Lutherans are split down the middle as well on that aspect, where one side is like fully embracing it and the other one's not. So that's why you have this split. So it says 52% of mainline Protestant pastors say LGBTQ can serve anywhere in their churches, compared to just 12% of evangelical pastors. Yeah, you see the big difference there? And the reason being is because evangelical, for the most part here, would be classified as more Bible-believing, Bible-holding churches in that aspect. 41% of evangelical pastors say there are no service opportunities for LGBTQ Christians in their churches. Now, again, I have a problem with calling them gay Christians or just putting it out to LGBTQ Christians, because you're labeling yourself by your sin. There shouldn't be any more of an LGBTQ Christian as there is an adulterous Christian, or a thieving Christian, or a murdering Christian, or a gluttonous Christian. Now, I'm not saying there aren't Christians who can struggle with these things. Are there Christians who struggle with same-sex attraction? Yes. Are there Christians who struggle with gluttony? Yes. Are there Christians who struggle with lust? Yes. But you don't put that ahead. You don't celebrate these things and put a title on it and say, hey, look how great I am. Where the LGBTQ becomes the focal point, and then Christian is tagged on after. No, we are sinners saved by grace through Christ, and we still struggle with the sinful nature. We don't celebrate it. So I have a problem with that. And then it says a similar confusion and disagreement showed up around same-sex weddings. It shouldn't have, but it did. Why? Because they don't understand what a wedding is. They don't understand really what a marriage is. It's more than just a commitment of two people. There's something more to it. It says the same study found that 87% of Protestant pastors have never been asked to perform a same-sex wedding. I'm not surprised by that. I'm not. Baptist and non-denominational pastors were the least likely to have been asked. I'm not surprised by that either. With only 4% saying they had. Presbyterian/Reformed pastors were the most likely, with over a quarter saying they had. And yeah, I can see that. But it's this idea saying, hey, come on in. It's what happens when the church gets off the track and they forget that the service, the church, when we gather for worship, it's for Christ, not for the people. And you say, wait, hold on, wait a minute. It is. When we come together and worship, the worship is for the audience of one, and it's for God. It's for who it is. I think it's Big Daddy Weave has a song called Audience of One. And that's what it's about. So the people on the stage are actually the worship leaders leading them in worship towards the audience, which is God. And you can't have, in this aspect, defiled worship leaders. This is no different than the Old Testament with the Levites. You can't have defiled Levites leading the worship. You can't. And you can't expect people to be able to worship, and this goes a little bit further, while engaging in a lifestyle of sin. This was a sin of Israel and a sin of Judah. This is why they were judged. You can read such things like in the prophet Micah, where they're trying to live however they want, yet still worship God. Any church that says, hey, we're going to allow anybody to serve in any capacity, well, you've gotten away from it. This is a sin of Jeroboam. Really was. Jeroboam's sin was he just made anybody a priest who he wanted. Who cares about qualifications? And the qualifications for these positions actively in the church are not defined by our culture. The positions of service in the church should be defined by that which is set up by Scripture. And they are there. And that's what the church has to get back to. All right, we're going to take a break. I think we need a little bit of a break as we covered quite a few things. So come on back after the break, see what we got in store for you. But again, if you got any questions or anything you want to comment, I feel free to put them in. Feel free to write to me. You disagree with me, bring it to me. Show me why you disagree. Not just, hey, I disagree, but come with it and let us reason together and be iron sharpening iron. You can do that by emailing me at pastorstephenteed@gmail.com. Email me there. Love to hear from you. So until then, come on back after the break. Tell me, do you feel stuck in life and you're just not sure where to go? You're just at that moment? Maybe you should try a life coach. I have with me Miss Sheena from Natural Talk Life Coaching. We're just going to ask a little bit about life coaching. So Sheena, tell me first off, what is a life coach?
Hi, Steve. Yes, life coach is basically as simplistic as partnering with my client through a creative, natural, thought-provoking process that allows the client to maximize their professional and personal potential. That's kind of as simplistic in a nutshell of what life coaching actually is.
Okay. So it makes it a little different because you don't just give advice, you empower the person to help them get to where they want to be.
Absolutely, that's correct. Is no advice involved. It is basically coming alongside the client to kind of guiding the client, aiding the client, helping the client figure out their next steps about what's kind of stopping them or hindering them from realizing or thinking through their actual potential.
Okay. So tell me, who would use one? Who would seek out a life coach?
Hmm. I would say anyone, really. Even the most prominent people, as a matter of fact, coaches actually have life coaches as well. So life coaching can be a vital asset to anyone, any common man. It doesn't matter who you are, what background you come from, the lifestyle that you're living, your profession. Everyone can use some sort of coaching now and then. So it's kind of a bit of both. It's very much an asset.
Okay. Why would they seek out a life coach?
A lot of times we come to certain places in our life where we feel like a little bit stuck or just struggling through some things. It could be something as simplistic as someone who realizes that they need a little bit more balance in their life, someone who is struggling between two types of decisions that they have to make. So it's kind of the regular struggles of any common person. It doesn't have to be anything that's tremendously big. It could be something as simple as they just need a little bit of help with something.
Okay. So it almost seems like what sets it apart. It's a short. A lot of times, it seems like a short-term thing. In other words, I'm stuck just for a little bit, so I can pick up maybe like 2, 3 sessions to help me move forward.
Hmm.
So rather than a long-term commitment with an organization or something, would that be correct?
That would be absolutely correct. Coaching can be anywhere between if someone just needs maybe 1 to 3 sessions. to someone who is kind of would like to commit to it for a matter of a month to 3 months. So the term itself can be short term or it can be long term, depending on the needs of the client. And the sessions can go anywhere from 30 minutes to as long as 45 minutes. I've actually had a client who their very first session, we ended up being an hour, which is okay. And in that, sometimes in those sessions, a solution is not really formulated at that moment, and that's okay too.
Okay.
So, like I said, it all depends on the time frame and needs of the client.
You mentioned a session. Can you just walk me briefly, like through a basic session?
Absolutely. So I'm just going to use an example. I just had a session with someone who just needed something as simple as balance in their life. So it is very important as a coach to kind of take in consideration that need that the client is trying to convey. And so listening is an important component of coaching. So in that sense, we come together and I always tell my client, you have the choice of either it being visual or it can just be through audio. Totally, the comfort of the client is the most important part of the session. And we walk through it by, I ask the client, first and foremost, what is it that they're looking to achieve by the end of the session? What is the things that they're looking to be most vital that they're trying to find a solution for? And then we go from there. And then I just ask certain thought-provoking questions of what makes it such a priority for you at this time? What are you looking to change? Is there something in particular that's stopping you from achieving it? And so on and so forth. And through those questions, it stirs up very, very much different thoughts and ideas. And then as it comes to a close through the session, we kind of go through some action steps that will help the client to kind of move forward. And like I said, it could be action steps, or it can just be one action step, something that's very feasible and that the client is accountable in doing. And so we make sure by ending the conversation that it is feasible for the client to do. And we have what's called SMART goals. Is it specific? Is it measurable, achievable, realistic? Is it right? And is it timed? So once that happens, then we move forward and we kind of have a check-in with the client as well. If we want to do another session where we can come back and see if that step was, formable and feasible for the client to achieve. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So are these sessions always in person? Or are they virtual or a combination of both? How would they work?
Absolutely. So these sessions can be anywhere from virtual, they can be anywhere from just a phone call, or it can be in person. During COVID, it made it very hard to do a lot of in-person sessions. So virtual was the most popular one that I did. And then I did a lot of phone conversations as well. So it's totally the comfort of the client.
All right. Well, I think we got a bit of information here. How would they contact you if they want more information? How could they contact you?
So very much so. I do have a website now. It's called Natural Talk Life Coach at outlook.com. That would be the very most one that they can use to contact me. And I will respond most definitely right away in a timely manner for sure. So that would be the best way to contact me.
Oh, so contact you by email at naturaltalklifecoach at outlook.com.
Yes, that's
All right,
correct.
we'll definitely put that on there for people who would like to see that. They can write it down. Well, I thank you just for giving us a shout here, and we'll maybe visit back in and get some more details later. But that's a reminder. It's for anybody who just seems stuck for a moment, who needs someone to come alongside, help them, empower, and figure out where they're going to go. And that's a broad variety. It's really wide open. So if you'd like more information, you can contact Miss Sheena there for Natural Talk Life Coaching. You contact her at Natural Talk Life Coach at outlook.com. All one word, Natural Talk Life Coach at outlook.com. Thank you for joining me, Ms. Sheena. We'll talk to you later.
Thank you for having me very much, Stephen. Thank you.
All right, welcome back to our episode. I hope you enjoyed the break. I know over the last couple episodes I've played the same interview. Truthfully, that is my wife, and it's her own life coach business, which can help you just just figure out some things. That's what it's available for. I encourage you to contact her. Just go back and listen to the break with the email address there. But we're going to continue on with our show today, as we're going to be continuing on kind of answering the question of what exactly has happened with the acceptance of things and what is going on. So into our second half here, we're going to be doing something that's a little bit more of a news article. And you may be going, well, why is it a news article? Normally you do a teaching, like a video or something like that. Yeah, but it really answers the question. If remember, before the break, the last story that we covered was from Relevant Magazine, talking about how many churches now are allowing those who are openly LGBTQ2+, serve in the church, in not just like random things like opening a door or sweeping a parking lot. We're talking about like right up front, leading in the worship, and even to the point of teaching. And it's so bad that you actually see those who are openly engaged in homosexual lifestyle, openly engaged in the drag lifestyle and the drag culture, practicing and teaching and calling this a good thing. And what is going on? So to kind of understand this, we're going to go to an article. We're going to unpack a little bit. We're going to go to some scripture. And really, this article is what this show is all about, what this podcast is all about. I know I don't have a huge audience or anything. I got a great audience, not a huge one. But it's what it's all about. It really comes down to this. Shocking new poll, only 37% of U.S. pastors hold a biblical worldview. Hold a biblical worldview. This is from ChristianHeadlines.com, but you can find it in various places. I just think they're covering it a little better. But only 37% hold a biblical worldview. It's what this show's all about. Foundation. Why do I call it foundation? Remember, the question that I open the show with is, what are you building your life on? What are you building your life on? And truthfully, the foundation of foundation is really your worldview. Now, let's talk about worldviews for a little bit. Worldviews. What worldviews are how we perceive the world, how we answer those questions. And I've taught on worldviews. And some of like the most popular worldviews, the most ones that are out there, are like the nihilistic worldview, which all the ones without a without a creator are ultimately nihilistic, where nihilism means there is no purpose, there is no meaning to anything, there's no right, there's no wrong, we live, we die, that's it. That's nihilism. It's a very bleak kind of worldview, but ultimately that's kind of where it goes to. But one of the other worldviews are romanticism. Romanticism, don't confuse that with romantics. But romanticism is this idea of follow your heart. This used to be I'd call it the Disney one. You go back, not modern Disney, you go back, watch the old Disney cartoons, which are the ones I actually watched, like Snow White, Cinderella, those kind of things. It's like, follow your heart. Follow your heart, that kind of aspect. It was a very popular one. How I feel about doing something in that moment. And another very popular one is the hedonistic. It's all about pleasure. All about pleasure. A great example of what hedonistic looks like. I think in Jamaica, they have a resort called Hedonism, where it's just all about pleasure. The idea of like Las Vegas, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Hedonism. The worldview is, as long as it brings me pleasure, it's good. And ultimately, you get this idea that it's expanded a little bit. As long as I'm doing no harm to anybody else, then it's good. Kind of idea. So hedonism is the worldview that I judge things based on pain and pleasure. If it's pleasure, it's good. If it's painful, it's bad. That kind of thing. So that's another one. So that's three right there. Romanticism, hedonism, nihilism. Then you got what you can classify as the scientific or naturalism worldview. And humanism can kind of fall into that in that area. But the naturalist worldview is that it tries to answer the questions, the big questions of life. It tries to, but ultimately it fails, and it leads to nihilism, where the idea is, hey, everything came from nothing, a great cosmic accident of gases, things that didn't exist, of singularity that didn't exist, but suddenly it existed and exploded into everything. And then where did we come from? That's one of the questions you got to answer. We came from billions and billions of years of mistakes, of evolutionary mistakes, until we got to the product on which we are at. How do you determine what's right and wrong? Well, there is no such thing as right and wrong. There really isn't. Richard Dawkins makes that point in one of his writings. There really is no such thing as right or wrong. There's just pitiless indifference, is how he worded it. What happens when you die? Well, you're just dead. So ultimately, that becomes nihilistic. And as much as people try to say that they hold to that kind of worldview, ultimately it is nihilistic in that what difference does it make if the world ends 10 years from now or 10,000 years, 10 billion years from now? Ultimately, the result is the same, that we cease to exist. And then you come down to what you can classify as the theistic worldview, which what you would find in Hinduism, Buddhism, and pretty much any actual religion, where there is a creator, there is a God, and it starts to answer the questions from there. But then you get to the biblical worldview. The biblical worldview, which I teach and I hold, answers the questions of life to the greatest. It really does. It answers the questions to the greatest. It answers, where do we come from? What is our value? What is our purpose? And what is right and what is wrong, and what happens when we die? And those are typically the questions of a worldview. Now, this article here, it says that only 37% of U.S. pastors hold a biblical worldview. Now, that means they hold what the Bible says is the actual view. Now, people are going to argue, so what interpretation are you going to use? Now, in other words, I'm going to go by this, by certain questions, that it's really going to be about a more literal translation of the Bible, and we're going to unpack that a little bit. But let's get in. Let's look a little bit about this. A majority of Christian pastors in the United States do not hold a biblical worldview, according to a surprising new research from pollsters George Barna, who says that the data shows a spiritual awakening is needed just as desperately in our pulpits as in our pews. Now, that's an important detail, because I'm going to pull up their actual survey papers, or the results of their surveys, in a bit. So it says, the survey released Thursday by the Cultural Research Center at Arizona Christian University shows that only 37% of pastors in the U.S. hold a biblical worldview. Among senior lead pastors, 41% possess a biblical worldview, the highest percentage within the subgroup of pastors. Less than 1/3 of associate/assistant pastors, 28%. Teaching pastors, 13%. Now, I'm going to guess... I'll come back to that. And children and youth pastors, 12% hold a biblical worldview, the data found. Now, the problem is, I don't quite know what they're making a difference between the senior lead and teaching kind of thing. There's a difference between the senior and the associate. And typically, they don't even call them associates anymore. They've gotten away from the idea of associate. It's like, family and future generations or things like that. They give them other titles now. But technically, a senior pastor, you can say that technically, well, I'm senior lead. I don't have an associate, though. So it kind of gives a broad here. And is teaching pastors, does that just mean somebody who teaches somewhere in the church, or what? So it's kind of hard to look at that, but still, the idea of biblical worldview here. Accompanying an accompanying report labeled the findings shocking. This is another strong piece of evidence that the culture is influencing the American church more than Christian churches are influencing the culture, said Barna, a director of research at the University Cultural Research Center. And I would agree with that 100%. They're allowing the culture to influence the church rather than the other way around. And how does it do that? It does it under this guise of being relevant. That's really what it comes under. This idea of relevancy. In Colossians chapter 2 warns, around verse 8, it says, do not be taken captive by deceptive philosophies, which are empty. And I think what has happened is our churches in North America and our seminaries, which are supposed to be training our pastors, have been taken captive by the philosophies of this world, the influences of this world, rather than the scriptures. In other words, they're allowing our culture to define what is right and wrong, the cultural view to define what is going on, rather than the scriptures to do it. And when they're coming towards the scriptures, they're allowing culture to define the scriptures. And that is the danger. Before the break, remember, I made this statement about the Catholic Church and Protestantism. And the statement about the Catholic Church is the Catholic Church holds two pillars of the church. They hold scriptures and tradition. That's of the Catholic Church. And I said what often happens, though, and this is what the Protestants separated from, is that the tradition becomes the top and the scriptures get interpreted by the tradition, where it should be the other way around. Now, I'm not against tradition, but the scriptures are the ultimate authority, and then the tradition should be answered through it, which means there are things in churches that have that are traditions in churches that shouldn't be. And often this will end up in legalism. Now, in Baptist circles, and because I grew up in that circle, things that were taught, and I remember this, even in my day, when I was younger, you don't play cards on Sunday, you don't roll dice on Sunday. And I remember even being on a trip, and we were advertising a camp. So advertising a camp, going from church to church, and we were on this place. And the other person with me was a little older, and it was Sunday, so we had done our services, things like that. And he sat down in the church and played not the church, at the table, and played solitaire. We were staying at a bed and breakfast. And I wanted to play, and I remember it was my mother who came along and said, well, no, you can't play cards on Sunday. And I was still pretty young then, and I was like, I couldn't understand why. And as I grew older, I remember being told, you still can't do this, and I couldn't find why. As I studied the scriptures, like, why can't I? And then I challenged my parents on this, and they couldn't answer the question. And so it's like, it came down to, it was tradition, and my grandfather was the one who originally taught it. But then I remember I was staying with my grandfather again, and my parents were there. We went to church. Like, my grandfather was the pastor of visitation. And we got back to his place, and it was later on Sunday night, and he wanted to play crib. Sure. Now, for those who don't know, crib's a card game. It is. Pretty fun card game. It was strategy and luck. But you play crib. And people were like, I was like, well, see, he played it. But what was happening is tradition was overriding scripture. And what has happened now is we've got culture now doing that same thing. And generally, I'm going to argue that it is people who are not as educated in a variety of areas. They may be educated in scripture to some aspect, but they're not educated in actual certain sciences. They're not educated in philosophy and culture aspects. They just accept that it's true. And so I agree with Barna on this, that the culture is influencing the churches. It says the survey findings were based on 54 questions in 8 categories. Now, here's the weakness of this, is they don't actually tell us what the questions are. I would have loved to see the questions, but I can guess probably what they are based on the categories. And what is so the 8 categories are related to biblical worldview. Within those 8 categories, the only one where a majority of pastors affirmed a biblical worldview is related to purpose and calling in life. Now, I'm going to guess the questions were on such a thing as certain like value, certain things on like people have a purpose in their life, that kind of thing, and that God calls people. I'm going to guess that. A minority pastors hold a biblical worldview in the other 7 categories. What are they? Family and value of life. Now, I'm going to guess those are issues on homosexual marriage, on abortion, on things like that. That's what I'm going to guess. And by that, I'm going to guess that, yeah, I'm going to say that's probably true. God, creation, and history. I'm going to guess on the area that teaching that Genesis is literal. That God created the world, that there was a real flood. Things like that. When you have somebody like Andy Stanley, who stands up, and I remember listening to Andy Stanley's Christmas message a couple of years ago, and he wanted to talk about, and he made the statement, and I agree with this, he said that Christmas did not begin in the Nativity in Bethlehem, and I agreed with that. I remember teaching a series myself called Christmas, the Whole Story. And so his next part is like, he's like, well, Christmas actually began back in Genesis. I absolutely agreed with that. That Christmas began in Genesis. And if you're confused on that, I'll explain that in a second. And then we disagreed because he came out and said it actually began in Genesis chapter 12. And I'm like, no, it began in Genesis 3. Genesis 3. Why do I say Genesis 3? Because Adam and Eve have fallen into sin. God pronounces his judgment and curse to the serpent. Genesis 3:15. You will bruise his heel and he will bruise your head. He will crush your head. That is the seed of the woman. Where was the seed of the woman prophesied? Where does the seed of the woman start? Genesis 3. Where was it fulfilled? In the Nativity. Where did Andy Stanley begin? Genesis 12. Why? He started with Abraham. Now why? Because he doesn't believe that Genesis 1 through 11 are historical. He doesn't. So he'd fail in this. He wouldn't agree with that. So he'd be in that less than 44%. He'd be in that 66%, saying that Genesis is not history. Personal faith practices. In other words, I'm going to guess issues of grace and lifestyle, personal holiness, sanctification. Sin, salvation, and one's relationship with God. Why? Because the teachings of universalism have grown. That only the believers are going to enter heaven. That Jesus is the only way. That things like that. Human character and human nature. I'm going to guess sin nature. Humans are inherently good. Humans are inherently evil. Humans are inherently wicked. Sinful. That kind of thing. And I'm going to guess that's what that is. Lifestyle, personal behavior, and relationships. Again, probably in this area. And the belief and behaviors related to biblical truth and morality. I'm going to guess issues of sexual morality, homosexuality, abortion, things like that. Now, as I said, I really wish that we could see the questions, 8 in each category, but I can guess what they are. And I can guess that they're teaching of a more literal interpretation of the scriptures, that the scriptures are accurate, that the scriptures give everything that we need. And what you've seen is a decrease. And you may say, you may be in a church and going, hey, no, I don't agree with this. And it's your interpretation. No, when you start holding things that the Bible is not inerrant, when you start places teaching that the Bible contains errors, that it was Bronze Age people trying to figure out the world, and now we've grown more. This is off from a biblical worldview. I remember a couple of years ago, we had a gentleman here from Creation Ministries International come in and do a lesson. And his whole lesson was really on, if you remove Genesis, you remove the gospel. And you really do. And I remember teaching a couple of years ago on called It Was All in Genesis. And actually I got contacted again by CMI saying, hey, we see you're doing this. And asking would I like some support in this. And they'll send somebody else, another expert who's PhD in sciences, to come out and help. And unfortunately, due to the COVID situation, that part never panned out. We actually had him scheduled and everything to come. But this is a biblical worldview. If you remove the foundation, it's all going to fall apart. And this is what is actually happening. It really is. And I want to flip over to the actual survey here for a second, because I want to break this down a little bit more. There you see the chart. All pastors, 37%. Senior pastors hold a 41%. Associates, 28%. Teaching, 13%. Children and youth, 12%. That's a major issue. Of the children and youth pastors, only 12% of them, of those surveyed, held to a biblical worldview. And that'd be issues such as morality, salvation, biblical inerrancy, Genesis' history, and things like that. And why is that so significant? Because of the fact that they're teaching children. That they are. That they're the ones who are teaching children. It's breaking it down by categories here. When it came to issues of sin, salvation, God, and relationship, children and youth pastors were only 22% had a biblical worldview. But the Bible, the truth, and morals, only 18% of youth pastors. Now I say, why am I speaking on youth pastors? Well, I want you to look at this paragraph right here. This paragraph right here. It says, keep in mind, Barna cautioned, a person's worldview primarily develops before the age of 13. Then goes through a period of refinement during the teens and 20s. From a worldview perspective, a church's most important ministers are the children's pastors and the youth pastors. And only 18% of them hold a biblical worldview, according to the survey. That's a scary fact. So what happened? What's going on? I'll tell you, the problem is starting in honestly, in the seminaries, where they're allowing culture to influence rather than the scriptures. That they're allowing vain philosophies to influence. But I want to turn to the book of Jude. The book of Jude. It's basically on false teachers. It's not a long book, but let's give a quick look over it. Jude, a bondservant of Jesus Christ and the brother of James, to those who are called, sanctified by God the Father, and preserved in Jesus Christ, may peace and love be multiplied to you. Here's what he said. Beloved, while I was very diligent to write to you concerning our common salvation, I found it necessary to write to you, exhorting you to contend earnestly for the faith which was once for all delivered to the saints. Notice that statement, once for all. It means everything we needed was delivered. How did it come? It was delivered through Christ, through the apostles, and then into the church. And it was everything we need. Again, Colossians chapter 2, it says everything we need is in Christ. All we need is in Jesus Christ. Hear what Jude is saying. The faith was once and for all delivered. It didn't need updated. It doesn't need to be continued to increased on. But what is happening in our churches, and because they're allowing culture, saying you need to update the scriptures. You need to update what's being said, saying this isn't really what it means. And now, and how does this play out? And you say, that's not really happening. Well, sure it is. When you say that you've got to be diverse in your academics. Now, when they say diverse, they don't just mean reading theology and studying theology from a variety of point of views, from like Arminian, from Calvinism, from Reformed to Evangelical. They're talking about you need to read from transgender theologians. You need to read from feminist theologians and put it in. Give them more credence. This is all under critical theory. They have more credence because they're more oppressed. So they understand it better. And so you got to go from that. And they're saying, and they're coming, you need to update these things. You need to bring these things in. So what would an LGBTQ theologian say? Well, those issues of that it talks about sexual sin and homosexuality, well, those aren't correct. You've got a new idea. And here's the problem is a lot of these problems are coming because of new ideas, new theologies, and new teachings that are arising. This is where tradition is important. What do the early church fathers say? What has been passed on by the greats who've had the Lord's blessings through the years? I even remember being in a seminary and writing papers, and the professor getting upset with me saying, you're not using enough new sources. And I argued with him, what makes the new sources better? What makes the new sources? Now you got to understand, I took Greek. I took years of Hebrew. So I could read the languages, I could translate the languages. And why is that important? Because then I could understand it. And when I wrote a paper, I would sit with like all the books in front of me on particular topics and look, okay, what's this one saying? What's this one saying? Why is this saying? And then when one disagreed, I asked why. Why did they disagree? And then sometimes it really becomes just because of their own philosophies, because their own worldviews. So should I let credence that? No. Why? Because the faith hasn't changed. That's the issue. As much as some people, and they try to push us in, saying that Christianity is a white man's religion. And I even saw that argument in saying, well, it would be found everywhere. Well, ultimately it is. When I go and you look at the Coptic Christians, you look at the Eastern Christians, you look at Christians in Africa, you look at Christians in the United States, you look at them in Europe. Certain things are different because of culture, but the tenets are the same. They're absolutely the same. And what has happened is this idea that the faith had to be changed. But Jude says the faith which is once for all delivered to the saints. And then what does he say? For certain men have crept in unnoticed, who long ago were marked out for this condemnation, ungodly men who turn the grace of God into lewdness. Now, that's what's happening. When you hear a title like LGBTQ Christian, what does that mean? They're denying sanctification, saying I'm covered under the grace of God, and therefore I can do whatever I want. The Apostle Paul talks about this, Romans 6. Shall I continue in sin so grace shall abound? Heaven forbid, he says. Absolutely not. We can't do this. But this is what is happening. And then they're proclaiming that God is okay with it. That was never supposed to be. And what do? They deny our only Lord God and our Lord Jesus Christ. You say, well, they're teaching God. No. They're remaking God in their own image. This is why you've got a prayer to the God of many pronouns. You got a prayer to God saying that God is transgender. Having people stand up and say, we need to see more of ourselves in God. They're recreating God. That's what they're doing. Why is it that these surveys are coming in? Why is it? Why? Because culture has changed and they're allowing it to influence them. Yeah, and you say, well hold on, what about sciences? What about the teaching of sciences? Look, I encourage everybody to go study and read things like people if you're in the States, you're probably more familiar with like Answers in Genesis, which is okay. I find Creation Ministries International far better because they cover issues of creation, of physics, of geology, and we're not talking what people would argue as even people at my level who studied in things. We're talking about people who are at PhD levels, writing and answering these questions. And turn them. So when something comes up and you're running it into science and you're studying, you're going, well, this is showing proof of evolution. Take it. And there were probably about 4 or 5 articles on CMI written by PhD scientists who would answer the question in that aspect. And we're talking about all these things. Issues of like deep time are on there. So in geology and things like that. But really what it comes down to, why do these false teachers want to come in? Because they want to change the grace of God to lewdness. And unfortunately, this has been portrayed onto our youth. This is what has happened. And what is happening without the firm standing of the scriptures and being very selective of who we allow into these positions, it influences the children. I remember talking to, he was a pastor, but he was also teaching at a local seminary. And the class, and it was on the idea of spiritual formation and church discipline and church life and that kind of thing, I believe. And we were talking this day, and he said first thing he did is he changed the classroom around to make them all face each other. And the first thing he wanted them to do on a Monday morning was to share something that they were thankful for of the weekend. Now, to understand, this particular school that I'm talking about is designed specifically to train Christian leaders, either into the church or into the mission field. It's a biblical school, so it doesn't have other classes. My undergrad was a Christian university, but it had sciences and education and things like that, and business, as well as religious and biblical studies. This is specifically a biblical studies course. So these coming up are supposed to be the next leaders in the church. And he said, what are you thankful for? And they all just kind of sat there and looked at him and said, okay, we're going around. And one person's answer was, I thank God that I wasn't caught when I was doing twice the speed limit down driving the road. It's like, really? He's like, he said he openly rebuked him right then and there. Why? Because it's a life that's completely contrary. And he says, and we got talking, he's like, and these are the ones who are coming in. This is what's happening. And like I said, when I went through seminary, I had professors who say, well, these books, they're fakes. I got other ones saying, no, this book's a fake. And these are the professors. And the worst part is the good students who come through that and don't fall into that trap, they will go out into the church. But a lot of where I found the problem was with the masters of arts in theology who were going to become, in essence, the next teachers. And they're going to be teaching the next generation, and they're going to be falling. And this is what has happened. They've snuck in unaware. So they've crept in unnoticed. Why? Because instead of teaching the Word of God, which has the answers for everything, they're accepting these other things. How did the purpose-driven church get in? Because it didn't look to the scriptures for the answers, it looked to the business world for the answers. That's what has happened. And now, instead of looking to the answer of racism in the scriptures, they're looking to people like Kindi. They're looking to critical race theory and saying, well, that's the ultimate authority on these issues, where the scriptures talk about racism and with the idea of favoritism. It really does. But they don't want to cover that. And then Jude talks about these things. Jude talks about these people. Look what he says. He says, these are spots in your love feasts. In other words, they're blemishes in your gatherings. It says, while they feast with you without fear, serving only themselves. And what does he call them? It says, they are clouds without water, carried along by the winds, like autumn trees without fruit, twice dead, pulled up by the roots, raging waves of the sea, foaming up their own shame, wandering stars for whom is reserved the blackness of darkness forever. Well, he says, he said, that's not very nice, but look at what he says. They're blemishes. They're clouds without water. They're not useful. They want to bring rain for the gardens. Nothing. They've got nothing in them. They're autumn trees which should bring out fruit. He says, not only they don't have fruit, they're twice dead. He says, they're nothing. This is now Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied about these men, also saying, Behold, the Lord comes with 10,000 of his saints to execute judgment on all, to convict all who are ungodly among them of all their ungodly deeds which they have committed in an ungodly way, and of all the harsh things which ungodly sinners have spoken against him. They're going to be faced judgment. But they're continuing to perpetuate this. He says, these are grumblers, complainers, walking according to their own lusts. Their mouths they mouth great swelling words, flattering people to gain advantages. Why do you think someone like this is going to be? I'm going to name a name here. Why do you think Joel Osteen has such a large church? He says, I don't want to talk about sin. He said that. You can find the interview. I don't talk about sin, he says. Why? Because that upsets people. Why won't they talk about LGBTQ issues according to the scripture? Why not? Because that's going to upset people. Why not talk about sanctification? Why not talk about holy living? Because it's going to upset people. Why do they get away from this? Because they've gotten away from one of the questions, and there would be about the history of Genesis, which establishes the created order, which establishes man and woman, which establishes what God created all things, and God created life, and God has a purpose for life. And when you get away from the history of Genesis 6 through 9 with the great flood, why do they want to go away with it? Because it's showing that God will execute judgment. In Jude earlier on, I jumped the passage, but he talks about judgment. Because they want to get away from it. They say, no, God won't do that. Yes, God's going to pour out his judgment again. He is. But they've gotten away from the worldview. It says, but you, beloved, remember the words which were spoken before the apostles of our Lord Jesus Christ, how they told you that there would be mockers in the last time who would walk according to their own godly lusts. And that's what you have. These are sensual persons. In other words, walking by feelings, relying on feelings, how you feel. They cause division. They don't have the Spirit. They don't. This is why we need to test everything. When you look at it, and when it is saying that less than half, only 37% of all the pastors, that's all the teachers, that's all there have a biblical worldview, then what chance do the people in the pulpit or people in the pew have, the people in the rows have? That's the problem. You see, they've fallen for this. And this is why we need to test everything. Test absolutely everything. But again, the question is, what are you going to test it against? See, there's those worldviews that I mentioned, the hedonism, humanism, scientism, romanticism, nihilism. They all fall flat. The only one that answers the true questions is the biblical worldview. But are we going to allow our culture to define the Bible, or are we going to allow our Bible to define how we live in this culture? Because the data clearly shows that we're allowing the culture to shape them. And think about that. If the worldview of a person is shaped mostly by the time they are 13, and then it just gets refined as they get older, and by the time they hit 20, 30, that this is going to be the next generation in the pulpits, the next generation of teachers, we're kind of in trouble. We're in trouble. And this is why I teach the biblical worldview. This is why I teach about worldviews. To help you and all of us to establish ourselves on a worldview that is secure and safe. The one that answers the life's questions. The one that gives the most purpose. The one that brings the most joy and even contentment. Those aren't the measures of it all, but can answer those questions of where do we come from? What is my value? What is right and wrong? What is my purpose? And what happens when I die? The best answers are found in Jesus Christ and in His holy word. But are you going to build your life on that foundation? Because there are vain philosophies out there. And they're all around us. They're being pushed on TV. They're being pushed in media. They're being pushed in movies. They're being pushed in our books. And it's just going to lead you down the wrong path. Everything we need is found in Jesus. That's where it is. All right, let's end our show there. And if you got any questions or anything you want to ask, I encourage you to write to me. Write to pastorstevent@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to talk with you. And I'd love to encourage you and answer your questions and strengthen you to be built on the foundation of Jesus Christ. So until next time, I pray the Lord bless you and keep you. May He make His face shine upon you and give you His peace. And may you build and be found on the solid foundation of Jesus.